This is Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. Okay, good evening. Joel and I are here for another fantastic episode of the Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. Now, tonight's episode is titled, Is Trump Leading Us to War? Now, admittedly, Joel, we have lured people in here with a clickbaity title. We're going to be talking about the ethics of violence. We're going to be talking about sort of violence and war in the Bible and genocide and these kind of wonderful things. And then towards the end, we will circle back to sort of the current political climate. But we wanted to get you in for a good discussion where we approach these things with logic and critical thinking skills with a little bit of human emotion thrown in for good measure. Joel?
Oh, my goodness.
Is that about right?
That is so compassionate of you, Trent, to offer that to all the people.
Yeah. Well, I'm otherwise quite pissed off right now, as you know. I think both of us are thinking about some of the wonderful things happening in our beloved country. Okay, so we're going to be talking about violence and its frequent appearance in the Bible and instances where, in life in general, instances where it may or may not be needed. Joel, to that end, which war movie made the biggest impression on you and why?
Man, Trent, there's so many war movies that I've seen. I know one that you're going to talk about is Saving Private Ryan. That one had maybe the biggest impact on me. A couple scenes in there, just like the brutality and it was almost too real for me to watch. But I do I like some of the movies around Vietnam War. Good Morning Vietnam with Robin Williams, fantastic. Forrest Gump, also fantastic. I really love the war movies that question war. I think about movies that really is kind of like the enemy that we think is the enemy is actually a lot like us, and it just messes with us. Last of the Mohicans, The Last Samurai, Dances with Wolves, Avatar, which is Dances with Wolves in Space, and Ender's Game, if you've ever seen that. When you like study your enemy, you begin to love them, or like if you just want to go like pure brutality and like violence, Starship Troopers is just a good watch. And then I wore this for us, Hattori Hanzo. It's not a war movie, but it's a violent movie. Kill Bill, right?
Very little to dislike in any of those that you mentioned. Very little to dislike. Yeah, I'll say for me, the top two would be Saving Private Ryan and Full Metal Jacket. Full Metal Jacket, especially the first half of the movie when they're at boot camp, an indelible mark left.
Brutal. Oh,
yeah. I mean, there's a handful of movies that the theater experience, the theater experience was I'll never forget and really probably changed me. And Saving Private Ryan would be among those. I just left that totally floored, totally moved.
Yep.
Well, I think that's a good backdrop for us because we're going to read some very brief passages in the Bible and situate these passages in our minds to anchor this discussion. And these passages from the Old Testament are Joshua 6:21. And actually, I'm going to back it up just a little bit before 21, but that's basically where we're going to be. And then 1 Samuel 15, verses 2-3, which tells of Saul's partial destruction of Amalek and the Amalekites. And Joshua talks about the incident that we think of as Jericho, where they marched around the city, I think 7 times, and blew horns, and the walls fell, and so on. So I'm going to start in Joshua. So it won't take this long, but these are kind of important. So then it says in verse 17, the city shall be under the ban. This is referring to Jericho, and all that is in it belongs to the Lord. Only Rahab the harlot and all who are with her in the house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. But as for you, only keep yourselves from the things under the ban, so that you do not covet them and take some of the things under the ban. under the ban, under the ban, under the ban, and make the
Yeah.
camp
Yeah.
of Israel accursed and bring trouble on it. But all the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord. They shall go into the treasury of the Lord. So the people shouted, and priests blew the trumpets. And when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted with a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city. Every man straight ahead, and they took the city. And they utterly destroyed.
Yeah.
Translation note, put under the ban. Do
Mm-hmm.
not take home with you, essentially. They utterly destroyed everything in the city, both man and woman, young and old, and ox and sheep and donkey with the edge of the sword. It was not a great day for Jericho.
Oh my
You're a
gosh.
kid, you're jumping rope in the street, next thing you know, sword to the jugular. God
Yep.
said it, according to the Israelites. All right, Joel, I'll just pause your reaction for just a sec, because we'll do 1 Samuel
Yep.
15,
Give
2 to
us some
3.
Saul
This
action.
is, yeah, like this is a good, refrigerator magnet verse about being obedient to the Lord, which Saul
Oh
did
my
not do.
gosh.
Thus says the Lord of hosts. And when the Lord of hosts speaks, you fucking listen. I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel, how he set himself against him on the way while he was coming up from Egypt. Now go and strike Amalek, and utterly destroy all that he has, and do not spare him, but put to death both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. It was like it was a kind of a formula that they had for their people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it goes in ancient Near East. Joel, respond to these. Give us your most generous take on these passages, and we can talk about how Christians will tend to defend these passages. How do you
Sure.
respond to those passages? What are ways to respond to them? How do people often defend?
Those are some doozies, Trent.
Yeah,
I just had this visceral memory of being in Sunday school. This would have been probably when I was 6 years old, maybe 7 at max. And I was in Sunday school, and our classrooms were just connected to the gym. So our gymnasium had like these colored doors on the wall, and they were like pastel pink and blue and green and another color. I don't know. I was in one of them, and we came out for this lesson on Jericho, and they had those old like wooden blocks that you could build with, and they were all standing up. They were all around like dominoes, and they had a red thread from one of them, and they had spaced out that last one. And so what we did as kids is we walked around that whole like circle of these wooden blocks, and then we blew these kazoos that were our horns. And
no,
they're cheap, they're little plastic kazoos, they're our horns. And then we pushed, one of the kids was the lucky kid who got to push the first block, and the walls of Jericho all went down. But because there was a slight space, the one with the red thread, which is Rahab, that hung the scarlet from her window, was saved. And we as kids are like, this is so cool. God defeats the enemy, saves this woman. There was no talk of slaughtering men, women, children,
yeah,
donkeys. Donkeys
yeah,
are so useful. Why would you? What kind of like economic policy is this, that
right,
this God doesn't understand that these things are resources that are helpful for the people? Why are you the donkey doesn't care who its master is. It can follow the Israelites just fine. So none of that was talked about. And interestingly, when I was a pastor, no one really talked to me or asked me questions about violence or war or anything like that. It was interesting. Most people were troubled by, why does every non-Christian go to hell? Or specifically, the major question of the day was, why aren't women allowed to be pastors, and why aren't gay people allowed to be members or clergy or whatever? I did have a guy on my staff that was deeply committed to pacifism as an ideology, and he was interesting to have conversations with. But
yeah,
when it comes to the Joshua passage and the Saul passage in 1 Samuel, Christians like to downplay these passages as much as possible. It's almost like talking to Mormons who skate over what Brigham Young and his forces did in Utah to take over that land, the massacres that happened there. We just want to skate over it because we stand on a floor covered in blood, but we're all just nice to each other and religious about it. Often Christians will say it was God's reasonable concern of to help ensure that the Israelites aren't going to start worshiping other gods or be tainted by these pagan religions. Now, if that's the case, if that is what God is doing in those passages, God failed because the Israelites worshiped all the time other gods, other pagan deities, poles of it's just all these different Asherah poles. I think was the
golden
the one that was
calves,
in Judges. Yeah, so God apparently is not a very good strategist if that is the interpretation. I read an article just before this podcast. I was just trying to see what are some of the crazies saying, and so there was a conservative website called inspiredscripture.com, and they say Joshua's campaign against Jericho and Ai is the other town that they later attacked, was a spiritual success because it teaches Christians that God has already won the war, that God will bring down the enemy's strongholds. Meanwhile, they are integrating passages from Jesus around loving your enemy, turning the other cheek. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. And so I have deep concerns. Well, actually, they're not even concerns. People who believe those things, I dismiss them. They're clearly not thinking individuals, and they're committed to an ideology that doesn't make sense, even according to their own Bibles. And so when it comes to Paul, or Saul, I should say, not Paul.
Yeah.
This is another example, like Joshua, where they're called to. The Hebrew word is charem, and the word in this context means to utterly destroy. So this is where you get these calls to kill women, children, infants, babies, all the livestock, and
It's just let me cut in. It's a pro-life policy, just to clarify.
Because God is clearly very pro-life. He won't kill babies once they're out, but once they're outside of the womb, kill them. Kill them all you want.
Kill them.
If they're in the womb, protected from microscopic, but once they exit the womb, slit the throats. That's what the Bible is promoting in these harem. That's what's happening. This is why I think that people who have these very unthoughtful, uncritical views of ethics, I just want to, you guys need to sit down, stop talking, and listen to smarter people. Because it's not that smarter people all agree, but at least they're thinking through the inconsistencies that are here. It isn't black and white when you read the Bible. It just isn't. And so I feel like people need to be invited into developing critical thinking skills. Rather, it's kind of like we need to teach people how to think, not what to think. That's the charge of our generation. How do we get people to learn how to think, not what to think? And so when I look at these passages, this is just my personal interpretation. You can offer yours, Trent, but I don't attribute these passages to God. The Bible in these passages say that God orders these things. I see these as ancient human beings projecting their cultural attitudes onto God. It's not dissimilar to today. Many Christians worship a God who conveniently hates all the same people and people groups that they hate. It's like, that's a red flag. Why does your God hate all the same people you hate? They forget the passages where God demonstrates his love for outsiders. That's Jonah in Nineveh. That's the Good Samaritan. That's Paul's defense of the Gentiles, etc. How do you see it, man?
Yeah, I've got multiple thoughts. So there are a variety of ways that Christians and like Bible scholars have tried to defend these passages. Some people will read the Bible in an allegorical way. That
Yeah.
historically has been a popular way of reading the Bible. So there might be some who think of these as an opportunity of teaching about spiritual warfare. Um, I think it was Erasmus
Hmm.
from the 16th century who had sort of a view of a dispensational view, which sees human history and like Christian history and epochs. This was the
Yep.
age when this was taking place, but now that has been superseded by Jesus' reign of peace, and so that's one way of explaining these things. I had a seminary professor who his way of sort of defending the nastiness of the Old Testament, he said something to the effect of, well, in the Old Testament, humans get an F and God gets an A. And I just thought, what?
Yeah.
That's your way of explaining the nastiness in the Old Testament? Um, and then I've had dozens of attempts to justify these things. Well, you can't appreciate how thoroughly wicked the
I
Amalekites
know.
were, the people living in Jericho, all the Canaanites, the Jebusites, the Hivites, blah 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 blah. You don't know how thoroughly wicked. I'm like, okay, I can imagine the most wicked, wicked, wicked group of people, and I still don't think they would be necessarily worthy, particularly the women and children and any innocent people, in addition to livestock that may not have merited death. Um, the simple way for me as an atheist that I look at it is I don't think God exists, so I don't think there was a God telling people to do these things. Occam's
That
razor
is the
moment here
simplest
for me.
way to get around that. Yeah, that is.
But I would say I see the problem for Christians. What's tough is when you see something that you know is wrong, but you also have to, your view of God and your view of Scripture is inerrancy and that God would never make a
Hmm.
mistake. Of course, you have to defend him. I've even heard a really hardcore conservative evangelical say, God is, whatever God does is right. So God did this, therefore it is right. And so that's certainly one logical way of approaching things. The problem is there's no room within that logical chain for anything that we might consider a humanistic moral reasoning. That's the end of moral reasoning. If we
Yeah.
can just identify the things that God does, then we'll know what's right. And so, but that would make a person a little concerned because apparently in that instance God was just for Israel and against everybody who was a non-Israelite. Well, this guy who said that, I'm pretty sure he was a non-Israelite, so but he felt comfortable about God's intentions towards him. uh so that's the way that those are some of the things that I would say
Dude,
about
he's
these
like, I've
passages.
been grafted into the vine, man.
Been grafted into the vine, that's right, thank you, Romans 14. But I would say that it is possible to another way of a legitimate way to read scripture is to set it against itself. And that is
Yep.
how a lot of groups of people have, even the Jewish communities for centuries have read it in that way, where they set it against each other and they make sense of it by its antagonisms.
Yep.
And I would invite people to do that. I would invite people into that, and also to be able to just say, this is nasty. Maybe the best way to answer it as a Christian, if I were advocating for them, is these are gross passages. We don't like them, but they're there. Marcion was not successful in eradicating the Old Testament. We still have it, so we have to do business with it. But don't say stupid stuff. It doesn't help anybody come over to your side. It really
No.
doesn't. Nobody likes killing children. Nobody likes killing young people and livestock. So it's best if you just said those are bad things and we don't
Uh,
know what to do. We're desperately trying to come up with interpretive solutions for this thing.
yeah. Yeah. It's really fascinating to me how people. I mean, the New Testament's not that much different. I mean, it's 1,000 or so, thousands years difference, but it's still an ancient world that's incomprehensible to the modern ear. And that's where the problem with people say, well, God said it, I believe it, and that settles it. It's like, no, 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 no. You said God said it. that required you to take an ancient text that you don't actually know the original language of, and you're relying on other people to interpret it for you. And you took their interpretation, and then you created your interpretation based upon your pastor, who probably doesn't know much about the Bible actually. And then you took that to mean God said it. So there's a lot between the Bible and God said it that you're not accounting for. There's multiple steps, leapfrogs, that you took to get to that. So it doesn't settle it because you're not thinking. You're not
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah.
And you need to be quiet about your views because they're hurting lots of people.
Right.
So sit
Exactly.
down and pay attention. If you want to learn the truth, seek the truth. Don't spout your ignorance. Stop it.
Yeah, this week I avoided pontificating about the structural integrity of skyscrapers, and the reason I did that, it's not because I don't care about being in safe buildings, but it's actually because I don't know anything about those things.
Correct.
So I found that a good rule to live by, and others might too.
Listen, some of these
Okay.
people that are telling me about Jesus, what Jesus said and believes it, I will listen to them all day long if they want to tell me about things that they know how to do, whether it's computer software or the way a
Yeah.
car
Right.
engine works or whatever. Like, I'm not an
Right.
expert in those things.
Yeah.
And I will defer. And I think it's time that people stop deferring to news media for their biblical interpretations and start deferring to people who have actually studied ancient texts and understand them in their context.
Boom. Mic drop Reno. My favorite dessert. Okay, so we've covered that. We've solved that issue. Well, why don't we talk about the principles of? We're talking about violence. We're talking about war. But let's talk about principles of just war. Just war
Yeah.
theory is very important in the realm of ethics, and some of the tenets of the five, six tenets of just war have been these. Joel, a just cause is
Uh-huh.
required. The right authority to deploy this action and to carry it out. The right intent, so like not just randomly slaughtering people, that's generally thought of as not just war. Proportionality, so we kill to the extent that it makes reasonable sense within our objectives, not beyond that.
Sure.
Saddam Hussein missed out on that one, among others. Um,
Genghis Khan,
last
maybe, as well.
yeah, Genghis Khan. Last resort, we've tried all other things. And then a reasonable chance of success, right? We're going to have a
Sure.
reasonable chance of success.
Uh-huh.
So in light of these things, Joel, do you occupy, and I don't think we've really talked at length about these things, do you occupy a pacifist or non-pacifist view?
Mhm.
But before that, just make a reference to Big Lebowski, this great movie where Walter Sobchak says, dude, I myself once dabbled in pacifism, not during Nam, of course. But what's your Sobchakian view of pacifism? Having dabbled in it, not dabbled in it, tell me.
Arthur's a great character, but I do not relate to him in any way, shape, or form, thankfully. That guy is a maniac. Um,
Calmer than you are.
yeah, that's funny. Okay, so I would say I'm almost a pacifist. Uh I would say any blanket ideology that is stubbornly committed to a purist ideology to me is a gigantic red flag. And I don't hold any of those views. I think those kind of views are purported by my ego. My ego wants to split the world into black and white to be right and make everyone else wrong. That's what my ego does, and I think most people's egos want to do. I'm interested in putting my ego to the side and allowing my self, my true self, capital S, to come forward, is what Paul would call the separation between the spirit and the flesh. I want my spirit to come forward and be committed to intellectual honesty, which means that there's going to be some gray areas at times.
Mm-hmm.
I was influenced by C.S. Lewis's essay, Why I Am Not a Pacifist. It's in the book Weight of Glory. And there's beauty in the pacifist view, I should say. And it's when you get practical that I balk. I was just talking with my wife before we did this podcast. She was asking me, "What are you guys talking about?" And I was talking about that, and she really does lean towards pacifism. But I was just like, but she admitted, it's like, I don't know what I would do in certain situations, and I said, I know
Hmm.
exactly what I would do in certain
Hmm.
situations. That if you, I'm talking to my wife there, or my two daughters, were under attack by someone that had no intention of slowing down, I would get violent.
Hmm.
Now, I might, if I felt like in that moment there was opportunities to be nonviolent, I would take them.
Sure.
There are little like hacks I've heard. You can ask, like, I heard a story of someone broke in their home, and the woman asked this assailant that broke in their home, "What time is it?" And for whatever reason, that threw him off his tracks, and it turned into a conversation, and the man just left at the end of that conversation. Now, I don't know if that's apocryphal or real, but I do think that I would try some things because I don't want to be violent. I don't want
Right.
to.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but there's also this part of me that's just human,
Yeah.
that if you are coming at me a threat and I have seconds to choose, I'm going to use whatever I have at my disposal to stop that. And it's
Mm.
probably going to be aggressive. Um, so I stop short of uh, these blanket ideologies. I don't want to commit to those, but I do believe, for me, the scriptures really painted a beautiful picture of peace. Whether you go to
Right.
Isaiah when he prophesies about beating the swords into plowshares, like turning weapons
Mm.
into agricultural tools.
Wow.
That's
Wow.
the vision, where the lion and the lamb lay down next to each other. Jesus said, when Peter tried to defend him when he was being arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, he said, "Those who live by the sword die by the sword." He was basically
Mm.
saying this is a perpetual thing. What are you doing, dude? Or Revelation, the vision of the restoration of Eden, and their leaves of the leaves of the tree will be the
Mm.
healing of the nations. These are beautiful passages to me, and that's
Mm.
what I want. That's my artistic ideology, that I want these
Mm.
things. I long for peace amongst human beings. But my issue is that when it comes to defending violence on a more macro level, a lot of these Christian thinkers, whether it be Saint Augustine, even
Mm.
C.S. Lewis, they'll start referring to, I think it's Romans 13, where it talks about, trusting the
Yeah.
government, that God puts rulers in places. They use this as like obeying the government because they're all under God's hand, as if we don't have tons of evidence in history of evil dictators and rulers using that moral
Yes.
justification to just sleight of hand the masses. Like, don't worry, this is what God wants us to do. We're on God's side. We need to slay the
Yeah.
heathen. And it's, you go back to the Crusades, where both sides, whether they're Christian and Muslim or whatever it may be,
Mm.
it's less about religion, even though they claim it is. It's more about political power and owning land and expanding empires. And so for me, when I think about that question, Trent, I want to champion the idea of
Mm.
pacifism.
Mm.
I want to champion the beauty of some of these groups, whether that the Anabaptists and the Mennonites, um, who are making very radical decisions to not cooperate with the cycle of violence. But I'm also on a kind of a personal micro level, like, that's not something I'm going to commit to when I don't know what may happen, where I might need to use my Muay Thai on some people.
Yeah. Right. When I took Christian ethics in seminary, we talked about different moral templates or moral philosophies, and I don't even remember all of them now, but the one that I gravitated to the most was basically called graded hierarchicalism. And basically what this means is that there are a hierarchy of values such
Mm,
that when a higher value a higher principle is in conflict with a lower one,
Yeah.
then the higher one takes precedence. So a classic example would be you're hiding Jews in Amsterdam in 1941. Knock at the door. Are you hiding Jews? No, I'm not. You tell a lie, because lying is bad, but not protecting people, not protecting innocent people from people who want to kill them and torture them is worse. That would be sort of the classic example of graded hierarchicalism. I am not a pacifist. Um, but I think that maybe the relevant comment that I could make to this discussion is I do think that the a real important conversation that we should be having as a society is uh, what are the kinds of things that should justify a war? And I sometimes do have a hard time thinking about that war is justified to. I'm not saying that I would be immune to this temptation to take up arms. But when people say that it's okay to go to war to preserve a way of life or to preserve a certain economic situation or these kinds of things, it does become a little harder to justify that. I think that to me, what's fascinating is to see the way that this is sort of a litmus test. But when you start talking about, if someone wants to talk about, let's say, terrorism, right, or war atrocities, sometimes they'll say, oh, these people are terrorists, blah, blah, blah. I'll say, well, do you understand what we did during World War II?
Yeah.
Granted, maybe it is justifiable. It might be, but we we firebombed Dresden among other European cities, razed them to the ground, and killed many, many innocent people. That's always been a part of the American policy: is bomb first, ask questions later. And then we dropped 2 atomic bombs, killing tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So we were willing to destroy thousands of non-combatants. Why?
Yeah.
Ostensibly because we knew that the human cost to the American military was going to be so great. That might be the case, but more than that, we did it to preserve our sovereignty, to preserve an American way of life. And we demonstrated as a country that we were willing to kill large amounts of enemy non-combatants for the sake of our efforts. So it's funny when I've talked with people about that, they get real fidgety. It's really hard to face up to that reality, but that is the
Yeah, and
reality of how we've
they
operated.
usually don't. They usually
Yeah.
don't face it, which means that they get stuck in their immature states of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. We're not going to solve this tonight, but it is really interesting to talk about these things and to
Can I
think
say
about.
2 things real quick,
Yeah. Yep.
Trent? One is um, I'm a quarter Japanese. My grandma's name is Kasuko Yamaguchi. She was not the most present mother for my father, who was born in Japan, and his father disappeared when he was 2 years old, and she was not a great mother. And she moved back to Japan sometime, and I don't even know if she's still alive right now. It's kind of some weirdness in my family tree. But she was a survivor of the Nagasaki bombing. She was about 9 years old when it happened. And apparently, the story I've heard is that she was in a room when the explosion hit. There was like this almost like a dresser or a chifforobe of some sort of like um, piece of furniture on the wall that was blown back and trapped her against the wall. And that's what took the initial radiation blast. And that she had all kinds of uh, medical help for years to recover. She wasn't even supposed to have kids because we didn't know at the time what radiation did to
Wow.
reproduction. We've learned that it doesn't pass on in that
Right.
way, but at the time we didn't know. And my dad was born, and I was born, and here this is in my genes. This bomb that was dropped on mostly innocent people. And then I think about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who his famous story of this pacifist leaning Christian who is a pastor, but was contemporary of all the things happening with the Nazis. And through we have documents of this excruciating consideration and thinking. What do I do? He decided at some point in time that the greater good was to put the nonviolence to the side and to join a plot to assassinate Hitler. Now that plot was caught and he executed. But I think about that that's why I'm not a pacifist as an ideology, because I don't know what may happen that might sway my thinking to act for what is most loving and most good in that moment.
Yeah, Joel, these are deep, deep questions, not easily disentangled for sure. And I think that one of the things that comes to mind as we're talking about this, is germane to this discussion, is okay, whether or not we're pacifists. That's one issue. But then let's say that let's say we both decide we're not pacifists. Still, one of the problems that remains, I believe that we send, and humans historically, we have sent so many people, particularly younger people, particularly young men, not exclusively, but particularly young men, to go often to foreign lands to die for God knows fucking what. That was one of the main things. Not that necessarily World War II was uncomplicated. I think when you look at the history, a lot of the motives for why countries were going to war were not were complex. But there, at least, it was fairly clear what was at stake. In the Vietnam War, we were like, what? That's so many people were thinking, what were we doing there? If you cannot articulate in one or two sentences why we're in Vietnam, there's a problem. And I just feel sad for so many young people who go off and join the military because of the fucking propaganda campaigns run during the Super Bowl or whatever. They have no idea what they're about to get into, that they're about to become cannon fodder. So I have this one idea, and we're kind of moving towards the wrap here, but
bring it.
One idea that I have is, again, I'm not against war, and I think there are instances in which it might be appropriate. But I would just say this as a policy: it is a job of Congress to declare war. So here's what I would say: every member of the House of Representatives who votes in favor of war must commit himself or herself to immediately enlist in military service heading towards combat, or if that person is not medically able to do that, they have to commit the next of kin, the next available kin to that fight. I don't see what's wrong with that policy at all. Joel? Okay, let me add to this and I'll let you respond. So they have to do that. The other thing I say, boot camp should include a mandatory period each day in which recruits study the history of warfare and just war theory. Gone is mindless, headlong rushing into fighting for God knows what. We educate people who are going into the military. Now, that's not pragmatic, I know, but that's the way I like to think about it. How do you respond to that, Joel? And give me your thoughts.
Listen, if we created a world of mostly non-meatheads, there'd be very few wars to fight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who could fight them? Now,
yeah.
Technology these days, let's be honest, doesn't need masses of human bodies to fight wars. All we need are people who are very good at video games to fly a drone that drops missiles on people these days. So warfare is shifting and it's changed. But I agree that if people are into, like, I'm going to fight for my country or whatever it may be, I think they should be offered the wisdom from the ages. This isn't new wisdom, this is old wisdom, and it's been around for a while. They should know that other people smarter than them, and probably they're the people that are 4 or 5 pay grades above them, already know. But they just are people who have seared consciences and don't mind if a bunch of collateral damage happens for the sake of a goal. And that's where I think you're right. These people who are making decisions need to have their own skin in the game. These are people who are sitting back behind, safe from this, the effects of their decisions. And they need to have skin in the game if they're going to make the decision. Trump needs to send Ivanka out into
That's
whatever
right.
war he's about to create.
Yeah.
She can go out there and just be eye candy on the stage and talk about business principles or whatever that she does.
Right.
Honestly, I think the solution, Trent, is that we evolve as a society, as people, as societies. We need to evolve. There's a TikTok that's been going around in the past several months. It's a graduation speech from the governor, J.B. Pritzker from Illinois. And the title of his graduation speech is How to Spot an Idiot. And he goes into saying, if you want to spot an idiot, look for the person who's most cruel. That's his statement. And then he says, let me explain. And he begins to explain about how our brains kind of work. Like when we see someone that's not familiar to us, our brains generally go to a place of fear and threat. Because that's how we've evolved as a species. We've survived as a species to be suspicious of things that are unfamiliar. Things like empathy and compassion, he says, are evolved states of being, which means we have to bypass or at least subdue that animal instinct to defend and attack, fight, flight, freeze, in order to see this as another human being in which I can offer empathy and compassion. And he says that if someone's life is marked with a path of cruelty, they have failed the first test of an advanced society. And I absolutely agree with that. And he begins to explain, this is a man who's, big into politics, big into business. I think he's connected to a big hotel world. I can't remember which hotels, but he's very wealthy in politics. And he says, in all my dealings with business and with politics, he says his bold statement, it's my experience that the smartest person in the room is usually the kindest person in the room. And it's such a upside down perspective to what we see in our government today, which goes into a very strong egoic states of being. President Trump is hacking into a large swath of our country's insecurities by being this John Wayne character. I'll go out there and I'm going to do what's right and whatever it may be. It's like he's John Wayne and Clint Eastwood together, but really he's just, screwing underage girls on the side and getting away with it. I mean, what are we talking about here, guys? Like, the fact that someone tells us what we want to hear, why is that enough for you? Like, I would like to invite you into your instincts around justice and love. Like, if Trump was against your people, would you be for him? No, you wouldn't. But you think he's a good guy, so why don't you trust someone that his ideas, regardless of whether they serve you or don't, why don't you trust someone regardless of whether it helps you or not, based upon this is true, this is good? Be self-reflective. Oh, I'm actually attracted to this person because he makes my special interests. He takes those on and serves them to the public, and he's raking all kinds of benefits for it. All kinds of benefits. I just would encourage people to really reflect on that. Like, why do you love someone? Why are you willing to dismiss some things? You'll throw away the justice system if they indict him, but you want the justice system to indict people you hate. So, like, be self-reflective. Like, oh, I'm not acting
Mm,
in a just way. I'm not thinking in ways that are consistent or rational or even healthier and good. This is really just me. I'm scared. And I get it. Like, if you're scared, that I've been scared. I know what it's like to be there, and I know how easily my brain wants to make enemies out of people who aren't enemies. But the evolved state of being is to put aside the fear and the perceived threats and to feel compassion. Like, please start feeling compassion for these people that are impacted by Trump's policies, whether they be Venezuelans or your black neighbors or people who are trans, whatever it may be. Think about this. Like, and
mm,
if you don't know any of those people,
mm,
that's a red flag. It means you don't know what you're talking about.
yeah.
Get to know some of those people and then start having ideas about policy.
One of my favorite movies is called A Man for All Seasons, and it's a movie based upon a play written by Robert Bolt, and it's about the life of Thomas, historical character Thomas More. And it takes some liberties, but it broadly follows sort of what happens, particularly towards the end of More's life when he ultimately was executed by Henry VIII for
Yeah.
his refusal to comply to Henry VIII's desire to break from the Church of England and to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. But there's a moment in the movie where he's in a room, he's with his daughter and his daughter's soon-to-be husband, and this soon-to-be husband is like a real fiery character, and he wants justice, and he wants everything sort of, he wants evil to be dealt with. He's very very zealous, and there's a guy that had just been in the room with them, and I think it was the character in the movie is called Richard Rich, who I think was a historical character, but he ended up being involved in betraying Thomas More, and so the son-in-law, Richard has just left the room, and the son-in-law says to Thomas More, he says, "Arrest him." And Thomas More says, "Why? He hasn't broken the law." And the guy goes, "Arrest him anyway." And he's like, and Thomas More said, "I wouldn't arrest him if he was the devil himself." And the guy said, "Oh, you wouldn't?" And Thomas More was like, "Well, what would you do?" He's like, "Would you break every law in England to arrest the devil?" He said, I burn through every law in the nation of England to arrest the devil." And then he said, "Mr. Roper," he's speaking to his son-in-law, he said, young Roper, after you'd torn down every law in England in pursuit of the devil, what would you do when the devil turned around on you? The laws all all the laws having been broken, all the boundaries having been torn down. When the devil comes for you, what do you have to stand upon? He said, "I would let the devil himself go for my own safety's sake." And I just thought that's exactly apropos to what we're going through. Folks,
Yep.
if you voted for Trump, if you support his agenda, that's fine. There's a conservative agenda. I think a society is strong when there is that dialectic between conservative and
Yeah.
liberal. We need each other. We need a conservative impulse. We need liberal. We need some of these things, and they
We need
work well
both.
when
We
they're.
need
We need
both.
both.
Yeah.
They're good when they're intentioned. But you think that you're willing to overlook his dictatorial, renegade, fuck all, I don't care about the other branches of government, all, you think that's great because he's doing your program. But what happens when it's not your program anymore and it's somebody else? You
It's
tear
like the
down those.
farmers in America, man. They're like,
Yeah.
we voted for Trump, and now they're like, wait a second, wait, what?
Wait,
Why are
what?
why
So
why are you
so
making these policies that are hurting me? It's like, I don't actually care about you. That's
yeah.
what the truth is. And more people groups are gonna find that out.
Mhm. And so be very very careful thinking that it's okay to tear down the foundations of society, not realizing how important they were for your day-to-day life. It's a fun time.
Trent, do you think it's plausible? This is the question, the clickbait. Is it plausible that Trump's manners of being, his policies and his bravado and his leadership style could lead us into a civil war?
Did you say, is it possible? probable.
Plausible.
It's plausible. I would say that I don't think that it's necessarily a high likelihood, but
Same.
I don't think most people would be surprised, myself included, if it happened, because so many of the ingredients are starting to materialize. You know, so much of it is there.
I mean, all of the stuff
And
around tariffs and just the back and forth. I feel like we've been on a yo-yo string with this guy's, I feel like whatever he does is just how do I stay front and center in the news cycle. So he just does things to stay front and center in the news cycle. He's very good at it, genius level even. But if our economy begins to dip instead of grow like it was supposed to under his promises, and then the people who suffer begin to suffer more, people in desperate straits do dumb things.
mm-hmm.
And we've learned from Trump that when he sees people doing dumb things, he doesn't stop them as long
No,
he
no.
figures out a way to leverage them for his purposes. He's an opportunist. He's really good at seizing on opportunities for his own personal gain. And now he's on a national stage and he is one of the world's wealthiest men that's probably his boss, not his subordinate. And I just like the ingredients. We have a president hawking Teslas on the White House lawn. None of this would even have been like tolerated 10 years ago. You know what I mean? Maybe more like maybe 15 years ago, because 10 years ago Trump was already making us weird. So maybe 20 years ago, none of this would have been tolerated. And I was watching I think I was watching a clip of George W. Bush talking about immigration back when he was president. And it sounded so reasonable. People were up in arms about George W. Bush and how like much of the devil he was. But it
Jesus
just sounded
Christ.
like so reasonable the way he just talked about things. I'm just like, please, what does it take for us to circle back to something that isn't just absolute fear and reaction?
I would just like to know for once in my life what it's like to look at everybody around me who's in authority and just say, nope. Like the cop pulls me up and he's like, here's your ticket. You're like, nope. And then like, it's like this person, like, you're like, the boss says you're late again. You need to be on time tomorrow. And you're like, nope. And this is like, that's the experience that Trump is having right now,
Yeah,
right?
he's
Nope,
like federal
nope,
judge.
nope,
Nope.
nope, 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 nope.
Convictions. Nope.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, well, if you want to know what the experience of being a child is like in a human's body, it's what Trump is having right now. He is living in
Correct.
the household of a spoiled child who is not told no. And like any
Yep.
of us, if we had that experience, we would just keep doing it. Any
Correct.
unmoral any young child who hasn't been morally trained is quite prepared to become a sadistic serial killer, right? So it's
Yep.
just, I'm not going to be told no. So anyway, this is fun and enlightening and uplifting.
Yeah.
We should almost
And I just
close.
really hope that all the sci-fi novels that I've been reading over the past decade, that they aren't prophetic. Oh God, please tell
Yeah,
me there is a reasonable amount of people in our country, like a critical mass of people that are going to be like, when the line is finally crossed, and I don't know when the line is because I feel like multiple lines have already been crossed. But like when that final line is crossed, it's like when the North of America saw televised Alabama cops sicking dogs onto peaceful African Americans and spraying them with these fire hoses. When they saw that, they came to their senses. That's the
right.
word that
Yeah,
we get in the parable of the prodigal son, metanoia, which
yeah,
is
yeah,
translated as repentance, but it just means afterthought. It's a coming to your senses.
yeah.
When will people come to their senses and go, oh shit, I wasn't really thinking from like a kind of a regulated space. I was just reacting out of fear and insecurity. That's why I went with this guy. when are people going to come to their senses and go back to their Father and realize, listen, all is forgiven. Come, let's slay the fatted calf, let's party, and let's like revel in grace. That's that's the vision.
I mean, it almost makes me long for a time when, and we've all had this time, when you get into this ferocious debate with a friend or a family member about some political issue, but you talk for like 3 hours and you get mad and there's a few cuss words, but at the end you give each other a big hug, or maybe you have to apologize the next day, but you're just like, well, this is the way it goes. This is the agony of a pluralist world, and living in a democracy is agonizing discussions with people that you can barely tolerate, but you do. And it's like, that seems like heaven right now, because that's not even, is that even on the table? We're not even having discussions, just like, this is what we're doing, fuck you. And it's like, okay, Jesus Christ.
At my job, I'm in corporate America, no one talks about anything.
No.
It's just like, no. And it just means, what's the famous, I think it's Edmund Burke, who said, all it takes for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. And we're in a state right now like that. And I don't know, I'm glad we're talking about it, homie.
Me too. Yeah, it's good. So, all right, people, well, here we go. I mean, this is how you do lead balloons. This is Lead Balloons 101. It's the alchemy of unpopular opinions. And so I feel curmudgeonly. I think we should probably end on that note. Joel, tell people how they can get a hold of us.
Yeah, please send us an email at leadballoonspodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to talk about a topic if you have any suggestions. If you want us to like put our little cultural, spiritual, religious bent on that, we definitely have that in our toolkit. Also, leave comments on YouTube. Share out our audio podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, all of that. You can find us there, and we would love to interact. Ultimately, we do this as a passion project. We like to talk about these things. Trent and I do. We thought we'd share them with the world. But ultimately, our goal is that this would continue, that it would create reverberations that you take and think about. Even if you adamantly disagree, that's success for us. That's what success looks like for us, is that people are engaged and are at least talking and thinking about these very important subjects.
Talking is better than killing, so I encourage it. On that note, signing off. Good night.
Love you all.